The next fight in the auto industry may not happen on highways or city streets. It may happen on mud, rock, sand, and mountain trails, the places where old legends built their names. This is a Chinese trail machine with a claimed 1,400-kilometer range, 4-motor control, and the ability to rotate 360 degrees in place. And it is a direct challenge to names that have owned the trail for decades: Jeep, Bronco, Land Cruiser, Defender, big engines, strong axles, heavy frames, machines built to survive mud, rocks, deserts, and whatever the terrain throws at them. But the trail is about to meet a different kind of machine. Like and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Now, let's start with the formula that built this world. The old off-road formula. The old formula was brutally simple. Build something strong enough to survive whatever the trail throws at it. For decades, that idea shaped the vehicles people learned to trust. The usual names that defined off-road credibility. Different badges, different countries, different histories, but underneath, they all came from the same belief. If the terrain is harsh, the machine has to be harsher. It was a straightforward approach, built around strength, durability, and the ability to take punishment. And for a long time, it worked. A serious trail does not care about comfort. It does not care about luxury, smooth pavement, clean tires, or perfect conditions. Mud steals traction. Rocks punish weak components. Sand drains momentum. Steep climbs expose every weakness in the machine. So the answer was always the same. More torque for difficult ground. Stronger axles for violent impacts. Low-range gearing. Bigger tires. Heavier frames. Each one a direct response to a landscape that showed no mercy. That way of thinking built legends. The Land Cruiser became the machine people trusted in deserts, mountains, and remote places where failure was not just inconvenient. The Wrangler became a symbol of trail freedom. The Bronco carried the image of rugged adventure. The Defender earned its reputation in places where roads were barely more than lines in the dirt. These vehicles mattered because they worked, but every great formula eventually meets its limit. The same hardware that makes a traditional trail vehicle tough also makes it heavy. The same systems that send power to the wheels also add complexity. Every gear, shaft, differential, and transfer case has a purpose, but each one is also another part that can bend, crack, overheat, leak, or fail. And failure does not happen in a showroom. It happens miles from help. The old formula solves problems through brute force, but brute force is not always precise. When one wheel loses grip, the vehicle still has to manage that loss through mechanical parts built around shared movement. Locking differentials can compensate. A skilled driver can make the most of the system. Good engineering can improve the outcome. But underneath it all, the basic idea remains the same. Tie the wheels together. Send power through metal. Force the vehicle forward. Jetour is not challenging that formula because it was weak. It was brilliant, but it was built around one belief. Toughness comes from stronger hardware. China's new answer begins with a different question. What if the next leap does not come from adding more metal? What if it comes from taking the old machine apart? China removes the drivetrain. Traditional trail machines are built around a long mechanical chain. Power begins in the engine, moves through the transmission, passes into the transfer case, travels through drive shafts and differentials, and finally reaches the wheels. It is a proven system. It helped turn machines like the Wrangler and Land Cruiser into legends, but that chain also creates a limit. Once the wheels are connected by hardware, the vehicle has to manage the terrain as one linked system, and real trails are never that simple. One tire may be gripping dry rock, another may be spinning in mud, a third may be climbing over a ledge. A fourth may be hanging with almost no traction at all. The old drivetrain can respond, but it responds through gears, locks, shafts, and driver input. It is one system trying to solve 4 different problems at the same time. Jetour's answer is to break that chain. Instead of sending power from the center of the vehicle through layer after layer of mechanical parts, the T8 moves control closer to the wheels themselves. The goal is no longer just toughness. It is a faster, smarter, more precise reaction to the ground. This changes the logic of tackling rough terrain. A traditional setup depends on metal connections. Jetour's approach depends on independent control, less force traveling through a shared power path, and more decisions made at the exact point where traction is won or lost. The real break is not just the absence of old hardware, it is the new freedom that comes after it. This new Chinese approach is not simply building a heavier axle, a stronger transfer case, or a more powerful engine. It is questioning whether a purpose-built vehicle needs to rely on that old chain at all. Because if one drivetrain no longer has to control every wheel as one system, something much more interesting becomes possible. Each wheel can stop being just the end of the machine. It can become its own source of power, control, and decision-making. And from there, the T8 starts to feel less like a truck and more like a machine with 4 separate minds. 4 motors, 1 brain. 4 separate motors sound impressive. But 4 motors alone do not make a vehicle smarter. Without coordination, they could create chaos. Each wheel would be pushing with its own force, reacting to its own patch of ground, and fighting for grip in its own way. One tire might be on dry rock, another might be buried in mud, a third might be climbing over a ledge, a fourth might be floating with almost no weight on it at all. The innovation is not just power, it is coordination. The T8 is not simply putting a motor at each wheel, it is connecting those 4 points of power to one central brain. And on difficult terrain, that changes almost everything. In the old world, power moved through hardware first, and intelligence came later through locking differentials, traction control, driver skill, and experience. A 4-motor setup changes the order. The vehicle does not have to wait for one mechanical chain to distribute force. It can make smaller decisions faster, more torque here, less torque there. A wheel that starts to slip can be corrected before it wastes energy. A wheel that still has grip can keep pulling while the others adjust around it. Instead of treating traction as one big problem, the vehicle can treat it as a constant stream of tiny problems, changing every second under the tires. That is a massive shift. The ground is rarely clean or balanced. Grip appears and disappears. Weight moves from one corner of the vehicle to another. A small mistake in power delivery can mean spinning deeper into mud, sliding sideways on rock, or losing momentum halfway up a climb. A mechanical system can respond. A software-controlled system can react closer to the problem. It can read what is happening at the wheels, adjust power almost instantly, and keep the vehicle moving with less drama, less wasted spin, less unnecessary force. Less dependence on brute strength alone. 4 motors give the vehicle muscle. 1 brain gives it control. And once power is no longer trapped inside the old drivetrain, trail driving starts to look very different. The vehicle is no longer limited to crawling, locking, and forcing its way forward. It can begin to move in ways traditional machines were never built to do. The clearest example is a move that feels almost impossible the first time you see it. The turn no Jeep can make, a tank turn. At first, it almost looks like a trick. The vehicle stops, the wheels begin working against each other, and the whole body rotates in place. Not a wide U-turn, not a careful 3-point turn. Not the slow back and forth shuffle every driver knows when the trail suddenly gets too tight. It simply pivots. For a traditional 4x4, that kind of movement is almost impossible. A Jeep, a Bronco, a Land Cruiser, or a Defender may be incredibly capable, but they are still built around connected mechanical parts. The wheels are designed to work together, not to fight each other on command. Tight trails expose that limitation. Imagine a narrow mountain path, rock on one side, a drop on the other. The trail suddenly turns sharper than expected. In a normal vehicle, the driver has to reverse, turn, crawl forward, correct the angle, reverse again, and hope there is enough room to complete the move safely. That is not just inconvenient, it can be dangerous. With independent motor control, the T8 can do something different. One side of the vehicle can push forward while the other side pushes backward. Instead of carving a wide arc, the body can rotate around its own center. This is not just a party trick for videos. It changes what control means in difficult places. In tight forests, narrow paths, rocky sections, or rescue situations, the ability to pivot can become more than a spectacle. It can reduce the need for repeated reversing. It can help the driver escape a bad angle. It can make a large vehicle feel smaller than it really is. The T8 is not only adding power, it is adding a new kind of movement. But movement means nothing if the battery cannot take you far enough. The battery problem. Every electric trail machine runs into the same wall eventually. On a highway, range anxiety is manageable. Chargers exist. Apps can find them. There are options. The backcountry has none of that. No chargers in the middle of a desert. No fast charging stations halfway up a mountain trail. No easy backup when the battery starts dropping miles from pavement. Rough terrain is brutal on energy in ways a highway never is. Soft sand demands constant throttle. Mud creates drag that does not stop. A single steep climb can drain battery percentage faster than a long stretch of freeway. Add cold weather, heavy tires, recovery gear, camping equipment, water, and passengers, and the math turns punishing very quickly. This is why range is not just a spec sheet number for a trail vehicle. It is the difference between exploring deeper and turning back early, between confidence and calculation, between trusting the machine and babysitting it. A vehicle can have 4 motors. It can deliver instant torque. It can pivot in place. It can control each wheel with incredible precision. But if it cannot answer the distance question, all of that technology becomes fragile. Because the moment the battery hits zero, the motors, the software, the pivot turn, and the clever control systems all become useless weight. So if Jetour wants the T8 to challenge the old giants, it has to solve more than traction. It has to solve trust. And this is where the 1,400-kilometer claim becomes impossible to ignore. The 1,400-kilometer answer. This massive range figure changes the conversation. In the trail world, range is not just a statistic, it is psychological. It shapes how far a driver is willing to go, how much risk they are willing to take, and whether an electric vehicle feels like a serious adventure machine or just a powerful toy with a short leash. Jetour understands this. The T8 is not trying to solve the battery problem with electricity alone. Instead of relying only on a giant battery pack, it points to a different solution, an electric drive system supported by an onboard generator. That difference matters. The electric motors can still give the vehicle the instant torque, smooth response, and precise control that make EVs so interesting on rough ground. But when the battery starts running low, the vehicle is not forced to search for a charger in the middle of nowhere. The engine can step in, generate electricity, and keep the system alive. That does not make the T8 a normal gasoline SUV, and it does not make it a simple electric car either. It makes it something in between, a machine designed to keep the advantages of electric control while reducing the fear that has held electric adventure vehicles back. The 1,400-kilometer claim matters because it is not just about going farther on paper. It is about giving drivers permission to trust the vehicle in places where trust matters most. A long highway range is useful, but long range beyond pavement is something else entirely. It means reaching the trail without anxiety, exploring deeper without constantly calculating the way back, and still having enough energy for climbing, crawling, recovery, climate control, equipment, mistakes, and the return trip. That is the real promise behind the number. Not just distance, confidence. The old giants built that confidence slowly. They earned it through proven engines, rugged parts, and decades of stories from deserts, mountains, farms, and places where failure was not an option. Jetour is trying to earn it in a different way by combining long-distance range, software-driven control, and a power system built around a new kind of logic. This is why the T8 is bigger than one SUV. The real story is not just that China has built a strange new machine with a massive claimed range. The real story is that the rules of the trail race are starting to change. And this is not happening in isolation. In the last video, we looked at how China is changing old assumptions in another part of the auto industry. But the T8 shows that the shift is now moving into a place few people expected, the backcountry. If you want me to continue this series, comment China EV below. In the next video, we can go deeper into the brands, the technology, and the markets that could be hit next. The new off-road race. The race used to be easy to understand. For decades, the question was simple: who could build the toughest machine? The old scoreboard had numbers people could see, measure, and argue about. Crawl ratio, approach angle, departure angle, ground clearance, tire size, weighting depth, payload. The vehicle that could take the most punishment and still keep moving earned respect. Jeep, Land Cruiser, Bronco, and Defender helped define that world. But the T8 points to a different kind of competition. Not a race for more metal, a race for more control. Once a vehicle can manage each wheel separately, once software becomes part of how power reaches the ground, and once range anxiety begins to fade, capability starts to mean something different. It is no longer only about how much force a machine can survive. It is also about how intelligently it can use that force. This is the shift China is trying to make. Chinese automakers do not carry the same trail heritage as the old Western and Japanese names. They do not have the same decades of desert stories, military history, farm use, expedition culture, or community trust behind them. So they are not trying to win by copying that past. They are trying to move the competition somewhere else. The new scoreboard looks different. Torque vectoring response, wheel slip reaction measured in milliseconds, software update cycles, battery chemistry improvements year over year, energy management that decides when to use the battery, when to generate power, and when to protect range for later. These are not the old campfire arguments about bigger tires and stronger axles. They are specs written in code, and that is much more dangerous for legacy brands. If toughness is only about mechanical durability, the old giants still have the advantage. They have the trust, the icons, the communities, the aftermarket support, the emotional connection that took decades to build. But once toughness starts to include software, electric control, extended range, torque vectoring, and movement that traditional drivetrains cannot easily match, the race opens up. History still matters, but it is no longer the only advantage. The T8 matters beyond its own badge because it suggests China is not just entering this market with another SUV, it is trying to redraw the scoreboard. The old race rewarded machines that could endure the trail. The new race may reward machines that can read it, calculate it, and react before the driver even feels the problem. And when that happens, the question is no longer whether China can build a serious trail machine. The question is whether the definition of a serious trail machine has already started to change. The new benchmark. This is why the Jetour T8 matters. Not because it is guaranteed to beat every Jeep, every Bronco, every Land Cruiser, or every Defender on every trail. That is not the real point. The real point is that it changes what people are forced to compare. For decades, the benchmark was mechanical. A serious machine needed a tough frame, a proven engine, strong axles, locking differentials, low-range gearing, and the kind of reputation that could only be earned over time. Those things still matter. They always will. But they are no longer the whole story. If a vehicle can control each wheel independently, pivot in place, deliver electric torque instantly, and still claim the kind of range that makes long-distance adventure feel possible, then the old checklist starts to look incomplete. Suddenly, the question is not just, can it survive the trail? It is also, can it think through the trail? Can it react faster than a driver can? Can it send power exactly where traction still exists? Can it reduce wasted movement, avoid unnecessary wheel spin, and make a large vehicle feel more controlled in places where older machines depend on force, patience, and skill? That is the new benchmark. Not just strength, but precision. Not just durability, but intelligence. Not just range on a spec sheet, but confidence in the middle of nowhere. This does not mean the old legends disappear. Jeep, Bronco, Land Cruiser, and Defender still carry something no new brand can buy overnight. Trust, history, culture, generations of proof. But the T8 shows that a challenger does not have to beat the old legends by becoming them. It can compete by changing what people expect from a capable machine in the first place. And that may be the bigger threat. Because once the standard moves, every brand has to answer a new question. Is toughness still just about the strongest metal? Or is it about the machine that knows exactly what to do with every wheel? The Jetour T8 may not erase decades of trail history overnight. Jeep, Bronco, Land Cruiser, and Defender still have something no new badge can buy instantly: trust. But the trail does not care about history. It does not care which badge is on the hood, which country built the engine, or how many decades of reputation sit behind the steering wheel. It only cares about one thing: what happens when the ground gets difficult? And that answer is being rewritten right now, in China. The question is no longer whether they can build a serious trail machine. The question is whether the old names are still asking the right questions. Like and subscribe. The next chapter of this race is already being driven.